The other great story that tells this in the Western tradition that I love is the book of Job, as translated by Stephen Mitchell in 1979. Now, that's a very important footnote, because the book of Job in the Bible, as translated in the King James Bible, doesn't really reflect the true mythical understanding or the mystical awareness. What happens in the book of Job is that Job is played with by Yahweh, by God. Satan comes to God and says, well, who's this man Job down there on earth? You know, he said, oh, he's my man. You know, he loves me. He's just completely devoted to me. And Satan says, well, I don't know. I see he's got a lot of sheep. I see he's got a lot of cattle. I see he's got these children, a nice home. I wonder if he'd be so devoted if he didn't have any of those things. God says, oh, absolutely. No, Job's my man. He's totally faithful. So Satan says, well, would you mind if I kind of tested that proposition? And God said, well, okay, but one thing, just don't kill him. So Satan says, all right. So unbeknownst to Job, God has decided to play with him, okay, and hasn't revealed that to Job. So what happens is Job all of a sudden loses all his cattle, all his sheep, his children die, his skin is covered with boils, he's in tremendous suffering, he's all alone, and he has these 3 people that show up to be his friends, and they meditate with him or sit with him for 7 days just to show they're his friends. And at the end of that period they say, Job, we've come here, we've just been witnesses to your suffering for the last week, and now we're here to try to help you get out of this. What did you do to offend God? You must have done something or this wouldn't have happened. And Job says, you guys don't get it. No, I haven't even sinned against God with a single thought in my mind. Job, you know, I know you're really suffering a great deal, and you've got to come out of this denial, because the fact is you have to have done something to offend God, or he would never have let this happen to you. And he says, I'm going to tell you one more time, and then I'm not going to talk about it anymore. I have not sinned against God or offended him in any way, even in thought. And at that point, he starts to rage against God, and he calls God to account in the court of human reason. He says, you know that I have never offended you in even the slightest iota, not even a thought. And yet this is happening to me. And you claim to be a merciful God. You claim to be a just God. I have done everything that you've ever wanted, and yet you've let this happen to me, and so on. So like a great lawyer, he has God nailed on the facts and on the law. So God does what any other great lawyer would do. He tries to deflect attention away from the fact that he's just been nailed by Job, and he plays the God card. And in this great mythical poem called the Book of Job, he says, who is this that smears my design with darkness? Let me now ask you some questions. Where were you when the angels first flew? Where were you when the birds first sang? It goes on from there. And Job, of course, can have no answer because he's only human. And so he says in the King James Version, at the end of this great confrontation of humanity with the divine, he says, up until now, I have only heard of you with my ears, but now I have seen you with my eyes, and therefore I repent and cover myself in dust and ashes. So essentially, at the end of this great confrontation, he says, gee, boss, I'm sorry. I spoke out of turn. Forget I ever said anything like that. I repent. I cover myself in dust and ashes. He ends with a whimper. He caves into the authority he knows is unjust.